In the heart of Chicago, a billion-dollar law firm was bleeding out over a single impossible clause in a contract. In the penthouse suite, its CEO, Damian Hayes, stared at the words that 10 of his best lawyers couldn't crack. 30 floors below, a single mother on the night shift, Lena Morales, was quietly mopping the floors, holding the solution not on a legal pad, but in the memory of a chapter she'd read the night before. He believed his empire needed a miracle. What he was about to find was a janitor, and their collision would redefine everything he knew about power, intelligence, and the fine print of the human heart. The air in the luxurious conference room of the Hayes & Lee law firm was thick. The scent of expensive mahogany, leather, and panic permeated the space. At the head of the table, CEO Damian Hayes' face was tense, his long fingers forcefully rubbing his throbbing temples. Before him, a dozen of what were supposed to be the most elite minds, dressed in designer suits, were creating a chaotic symphony of incompetence. The rustle of paper mixed with arrogant voices quoting Latin laws. They weren't even sure they understood. All focus was on the words written on the giant whiteboard. Clause 3A-B Renshaw Group Contract. It wasn't just a clause. It was an inescapable legal tangle, a trap that could cost the company millions of dollars and something even more precious. To Damian, its reputation. It's a dead end. There are no loopholes, one lawyer exclaimed, his voice full of resignation. Damian exhaled sharply, disappointment etched deep in his gray eyes. And to hear that, I paid for degrees from the most prestigious schools. Just then, the door opened quietly. Lena Morales silently pushed her cleaning cart in. She had been called to wipe up a water spill someone had made in their stress. She wore a faded Rolling Stones t-shirt, completely out of place in a forest of suits and silk ties. She moved as silently as a ghost, trying to be as invisible as possible, focusing only on the small puddle on the floor. But as she looked up, her gaze unintentionally fell upon the whiteboard. The scribbled notes, the tangled arrows. She tilted her head slightly, a barely perceptible frown on her face. "Sir," her voice rang out, not loud but clear enough to cut through the chaotic noise. "That doesn't look like a locked door." Silence enveloped the room as if someone had pulled the plug. 11 pairs of expensive eyes and one pair of powerful gray eyes turned in unison toward the woman holding a mop. Damian narrowed his eyes. "What did you just say?" Lena turned to face him, her gaze direct and utterly fearless. "I said, it doesn't look like a locked door. It looks more like a door installed with its hinges on the wrong side. Its structure directly conflicts with the logic of Article 127 of the Federal Contract Code." A lawyer let out a mocking cough. Another, clearly annoyed, said, "With all due respect, this is a professional setting." Lena smiled, a gentle but weighty smile. "And what part of what I said wasn't professional? If the truth depends on the uniform I'm wearing, then I can borrow a suit tomorrow. But I'm afraid that clause will still be just as wrong." Damian stared at Lena, as if trying to decipher a complex code that had just appeared before him. "How do you know these things?" "I read," she replied simply. "I have a set of civil law books at home. A professor who used to live in my neighborhood gave them to me. I read every night after my son goes to bed." "You studied law?" Damian asked, his tone losing its sharpness, replaced by undisguised curiosity. 3 years. I had to stop with only a year left to graduate. Life had more urgent priorities than a degree, like bills and diapers for my son. But I never stopped reading. Damian slowly stood up. He walked past the stunned lawyers as if they didn't exist. He stopped a few feet from Lena. "Repeat what you said." "In detail." Lena set the mop aside and crossed her arms. Now, she was no longer the janitor, but a sharp analyst. Clause 3A-B is written with a structure dependent on a conditional paragraph. in Section 14, but it contradicts Article 127 of the Federal Code. This creates an opening to void it due to interpretive ambiguity, especially if you argue it based on the precedent in Garvin v. Dakota Energy, 2019. Another silence. This time, no one dared to cough. Damian kept his eyes on her. For the first time in years, his face was free of its cold judgment. It seemed he was seeing something that didn't fit into any spreadsheet or chart he had ever known. "Ms. Lena Morales," he said, his voice clear, "this meeting is over. Everyone else can leave. As for you, please come to my office. We need to talk." Damian Hayes' office was like a cathedral of power. Everything was perfectly, coldly, and precisely arranged, from the abstract art on the walls to the gleaming, dust-free ebony desk. Lena entered, her faded t-shirt like a discordant note in this symphony of wealth. She left her card outside the door. She knew what Damian needed from her now wasn't a mop. Without a word, Damian turned his tablet screen toward her. On it was a dense paragraph of legal jargon. "A merger clause my team proposed for a client in Florida. What do you think?" Lena's eyes scanned the screen. She didn't read it like one reads text. She read it like a conductor studying a complex score. A few seconds later, she leaned back in her chair. "It's a perfectly designed labyrinth," she said calmly. "A labyrinth with no exit for their partner. It uses 5 subclauses to hide a single intention at its core. Very clever, but if it comes before a discerning judge, they will see it as intentional misdirection." Damian raised an eyebrow slightly. "My top 3 lawyers drafted it." Lena shrugged. "Then perhaps they should spend more time reading case law instead of contract templates." "Books never go out of style, sir." Damian showed no sign of annoyance. Instead, an almost imperceptible smile touched his lips. He had found what he needed. "I need your mind, Lena, but no one can know. You will officially remain a janitor. But, off the clock, you will be my secret counsel." "What will my title be?" Lena asked, a mischievous glint in her eyes. Damian thought for a moment. "The Claw Sanitation Specialist." "I accept," she replied, "as long as the benefits include unlimited access to the coffee machine." Their collaboration began like a silent chess game. Damian never directly assigned her work. Instead, he would accidentally leave a file on his desk before leaving. The first situation was a hostile takeover defense. His lawyers were fiercely debating whether to activate the poison pill clause, a risky move that could invite a countersuit for harming the company itself. The next morning, when Damian arrived, he found a small yellow post-it note on his computer monitor. Lena's handwriting was neat. "Use the scalpel, Section 7. Not the sledgehammer, Section 22. The patient will thank you." Damian understood immediately. Section 7 was a golden parachute clause for key executives, a much more elegant move. Just enough to deter the acquirer without destroying the company's value. In the meeting that morning, he stunned the entire legal team by presenting this elegant strategy as if he had thought of it long ago. The second situation was even more subtle. A tech startup client was being sued by a corporate giant for patent infringement. Damian's team was preparing for a long and costly legal battle. That afternoon, Lena was cleaning the break room when she overheard 2 junior lawyers lamenting the case. "We can't win a technical fight. They have too much money," one said. On her way out, Lena walked past them and said casually, as if talking about the weather, "Don't look at the blueprints. Look at the calendar." She left, leaving 2 bewildered lawyers in her wake. "The calendar?" they repeated. Then, suddenly, a light bulb went on in one of their heads. He scrambled back to his desk, frantically digging through documents. "That's it. The date. They filed their patent after our client demonstrated the product at a tech fair. Prior public disclosure." A whole new avenue, a potential fatal blow to the opponent's case, was opened by a single, offhand comment next to the water cooler. Before long, whispers began to echo in the halls of Hayes and Lee. "The boss has been scarily sharp lately," one said. "I heard he hired some secret consultant from Switzerland," another added. "It's like he has a legal crystal ball." And in another corner of the building, the keeper of that crystal ball was quietly wiping down the very whiteboard where it all began, a discreet, knowing smile on her face. The silent machine between Damian and Lena worked perfectly. The firm's efficiency skyrocketed. Thorny cases were resolved with surprisingly elegant strategies. The whispers in the hallway grew louder, but no one could pinpoint the source of this magic. No one, except Alexander Rios. Alex, the young lawyer with a Cambridge degree and an ambition bigger than his office, felt threatened. He had worked tirelessly to get where he was, but now all his achievements were being overshadowed by Damian's sudden brilliance. Alex began to watch. He noticed a strange pattern. Damian's genius always peaked on the mornings after the cleaning crew had visited his office the night before. Cold suspicion began to form in Alex's mind. He decided it was time to set a trap. The next morning, Alex walked into Damian's office with an urgent expression, holding a file. "Damian, there's an urgent issue with the Sterling Group contract," Alex said, his voice serious. "I just discovered a sub-indemnity clause that conflicts with a Delaware state trust regulation from 1978. A tiny error, but it could collapse the whole deal." Damian looked at Alex, then at the file. "All right, leave it with me." Alex nodded and left, a discreet, self-satisfied smile on his lips. He knew very well that the 1978 regulation didn't exist. He had just made it up. A perfect trap, baited with a legal detail no one could know without reading the document directly. That afternoon, as usual, Damian left the Sterling file on his desk. From his own office across the way, Alex had a perfect view. He waited, and then he saw what he wanted to see. Lena pushing her cleaning cart into Damian's office. The strategy meeting the next morning consisted of just 3 people: Damian, Alex, and Sarah, another senior lawyer. "Before we begin," Damian said, "about the Sterling contract issue Alex raised yesterday, it's nothing to worry about. That 1978 regulation was superseded by the Federal Commercial Safety Act long ago. Our clause is solid." Sarah nodded in admiration. Alex, however, smiled a cold smile. "Impressive, Damian," Alex said, his voice as soft as velvet but as sharp as a razor. "Truly a brilliant mind. But there's a small detail ... He paused, letting the silence envelop the room. "That 1978 regulation," Alex continued, emphasizing every word, "it doesn't exist." The air in the room froze. Sarah gasped, looking bewilderedly. From Damian to Alex, Damian's face remained a cold mask, but for a split second, Alex caught the flicker of panic in his eyes. Alex leaned back in his chair, savoring his moment of victory. "I made it up yesterday, as a test. And I was just wondering, how could you possibly know how to counter a non-existent problem, unless you heard the solution from someone else?" Alex's voice dropped to a venomous whisper. "The only other person in your office last night, besides you, was the janitor." Just then, as if orchestrated by fate, Lena passed by in the hallway outside the glass wall of the conference room, pushing her familiar cart. She couldn't hear anything, but she could feel the stares directed at her. She stopped, looking at the 3 frozen figures inside. She saw Alex's triumphant face, Sarah's shock, and Damian's deathly silence, and Lena knew her secret had been revealed. The silence in the conference room became heavy, thick enough to be cut with a knife. Alex Rios was savoring his triumphant moment, a smug smirk on his face. Damian was cornered, his face emotionless, but his mind a raging storm. Sarah was speechless, her eyes darting between Damian, Alex, and the figure of Lena standing motionlessly in the glass-walled hallway. Damian took a breath, preparing to speak, to quell the crisis. But before he could, Lena acted. She calmly pushed her cleaning cart to the side, straightened her faded t-shirt, and walked directly into the conference room. She showed no fear or hesitation. She entered as if it was a place where she belonged. Her first gaze was not for Alex, but for Damian. "That's right," she said, her voice clear and steady. "I was the one who helped him." The blunt confession caught Alex slightly off guard. He had expected denial, a panicked scene, not this calm admission. Lena then turned to Alex, her eyes meeting his directly, a profound depth in her stare. "You studied at Cambridge, didn't you, Mr. Rios? You spent those years in libraries, debating lofty legal theories. I had 3 years like that, too." A flicker of surprise crossed Alex's and Sarah's faces. "I loved the law with all my heart," Lena continued, her voice even, as if telling someone else's story. "But then life happened. A small life was on its way, and the baby's father decided he wasn't ready. When you have to choose between law books and milk for your child, between an exam and a midnight fever, you learn something no prestigious university can teach you. There is no room for error. Every mistake comes at a very real price." She paused, letting her words sink into the air. "You spent your career trying to impress. I've just been trying not to fail." Then, she walked to the table and picked up the sterling contract. "Your trap was clever, Mr. Rios," she said, lightly flipping a page. "Your non-existent 1978 regulation. I spotted it as soon as I skimmed the page. It was too obvious, too dramatic." She looked up at Alex, and this time, there was a glint of cold steel in her eyes. "But it seems that while you were busy creating a fake trap, you missed a real one." Her finger pointed to a different paragraph. Clause 1(1)(c), regarding the transfer of intellectual property. It references a Digital Copyright Act that was amended 6 months ago. A minor change, but it completely alters the obligations of the parties. She placed the file down on the table with a soft but authoritative thud. If this draft had been sent, it wouldn't just be worthless. It would open the door for Sterling to sue us for negligent counsel, an error that could cost the firm millions. Not a joke to prove a point in a conference room. The color drained from Alex's face. The smug smile froze, then shattered, replaced by the pallor of horror. He frantically flipped to the page Lena had indicated, his hands beginning to tremble. He knew she was right. In his effort to appear clever, he had committed a foolish and disastrous mistake. Sarah looked at Lena with unconcealed awe. Almost reverence. Damian looked at Lena too. But his gaze was no longer one of panic or anger. It was one of profound respect, admiration, and something warmer. He no longer saw her as a problem to be solved, but as the answer he never knew he was looking for. He slowly turned to Alex, who was still frozen with the file in his hands. "Alex," Damian said, his voice dangerously quiet, "clear out your desk, now." When the door slammed shut behind Alex Rios, who carried with him a career that had just turned to smoke, the taut atmosphere in the conference room finally snapped. Sarah, sensing the tension and privacy of the moment, quickly found an excuse to leave, leaving Damian and Lena alone in the heavy silence. Damian turned to Lena. For the first time, his cold CEO mask completely gone. His face showed relief, admiration, and an emotion so sincere it was almost painful. "Lena," he said, his voice hoarse, "you didn't have to do that. You could have stayed silent. But you chose to speak." He stepped closer, the space between them now just a hand's breadth. The air seemed to crackle. "Thank you." Before Lena could react, Damian did something neither of them expected. He leaned down and kissed her. It wasn't a gentle kiss. It was intense, urgent, filled with all the gratitude, admiration, and pent-up emotion from the past weeks. For a brief second, Lena was stunned, her heart seeming to stop before it began to gallop wildly. But then, Damian pulled back abruptly, as if he had touched fire. His expression shifted from passion to panic. He ran a hand through his hair and confusion. No ... double coats, he muttered, more to himself than to her. This shouldn't have happened. It was a mistake. He looked at her, his eyes now full of complication. You work for me, Lena. This is completely unprofessional. Mistake. Unprofessional. The two words were like buckets of ice water, dousing the nascent hope that had just sparked in Lena's heart. The smile that had just begun to form on her lips froze. The wall she had tried to lower was now rebuilt, higher and stronger than ever. The next morning, Lena arrived at work to find a huge bouquet of white roses next to her cleaning station. They were extravagantly, arrogantly beautiful. The attached card had a single hastily written line. I apologize for my inappropriate behavior. D.H. Lena looked at the flowers, emotionless. She calmly picked them up, walked straight to Damian's office without knocking, and placed them on his ebony desk. He was sitting there, looking exhausted. Thank you for the flowers, sir, she said, her voice even but as cold as ice. But I'm not allergic to roses. I'm allergic to apologies sent via a florist. She turned and left, leaving Damian speechless, with the rejected flowers and his rejected apology. A few hours later, he called her back. This time, he made the official offer, the position of special legal counsel with a private office and a deserving salary. It was a career path paved with roses, but all Lena could see were the thorns. That night, Lena couldn't sleep. She sat in the dark, watching her son Miguel sleep peacefully. Damian's words echoed in her head. A kiss, then an apology. He had turned a moment of genuine connection into inappropriate behavior, a mistake to be fixed with flowers and a job title. Did he see me, she wondered, or just an employee with whom he crossed a line? The familiar, bitter fear rose up again. Another man fascinated by her intellect, but terrified of the complexity of a real relationship. Another man who might abandon her when the novelty wore off. She couldn't put Miguel through another heartbreak. She couldn't gamble her son's peace on a man who wasn't even sure of his own feelings. The next morning, Lena walked into Damian's office with a clear decision. I will accept the position, she said. Damian breathed a sigh of relief, but she wasn't finished. I'm accepting it because I deserve it, because my competence has been proven. She looked him straight in the eye. But, Damian, about what happened yesterday, you were right. It was a mistake. She used his own words to create an uncrossable boundary. And to ensure that mistake isn't repeated, our relationship from now on will be strictly business. Clear and professional. She paused for a beat. Do you agree to those terms? Damian looked at her, saw the unshakable resolve in her eyes. He had won her mind for the company. But it seemed he had just lost the chance to win her heart, trapped by his own fearful words. I agree, he said softly, a bitter taste in his mouth. In the days following the incident, a new, cold order was established at Hayes and Lee. Lena accepted her new office, her new title, and her new salary. She performed her job perfectly. Her analyses were sharp, her arguments irrefutable. But they were delivered via email, devoid of witty notes or knowing smiles. She was an invaluable asset to the company, and a complete stranger to Damian. Damian sat in his luxurious office, surrounded by growth charts and million-dollar contracts. He had won. He had secured Lena's brilliant mind for the firm. But he felt a terrifying emptiness. The joy of victory was hollow. He realized he didn't just miss her analysis. He missed her jokes, her shrugs, her fearless, direct gaze. He had her intellect, but he had lost her spirit. That emptiness drove him to do something he had never considered before. On a Saturday afternoon, he drove. No destination, no appointment. He just drove toward Lena's neighborhood, as if pulled by an invisible force. He found her in the most unexpected of places, the Hope Community Center, an old but clean building. Through the window, he saw Lena standing before a group of a few dozen people. No lectern, no projector. Just her, a whiteboard, and an audience listening with rapt attention. She was explaining consumer rights, but she wasn't using legal jargon. She compared warranties to a lover's promise, and deceptive contracts to a cake recipe that hides important ingredients. The people laughed, nodded, and asked questions. He saw a completely different Lena, a passionate educator, a true community leader. She wasn't using knowledge to win. She was using it to empower. Damian stood there, a powerful CEO hiding behind a tree, feeling smaller than he ever had in his life. He had spent his life building an empire based on power and profit. She had built a whole world based on sharing and kindness. When the talk ended, Damian gathered his courage and walked inside. Lena was surprised to see him. "Damian, what are you doing here?" "Was just passing by," he lied, and they both knew it was a lie. Just then, a little boy ran out and threw his arms around Lena. "Mom, you were amazing." It was Miguel. He looked at Damian with wide, curious eyes. "Hey, you're the man who sent Mom the flowers." Lena blushed. An older, kind-faced woman approached. It was her mother, Carmen. "Hello, Mr. Hayes," she said, her smile warm. "A pleasure to meet you. Lena talks about you." She looked at Damian with shrewd eyes. "My daughter isn't complicated. She just doesn't accept being treated as a second choice. If you truly have feelings for her, be brave. If not, be honest." Her direct but kind words stunned Damian. Before he could reply, she continued, "Well, you're both having dinner with us. I've made enough lasagna to feed an army." That evening, Damian sat in Lena's small, cozy kitchen. He ate the best lasagna he had ever tasted, listened to Miguel's stories from school, and talked with Carmen. He found himself in a completely different world. Here, value wasn't measured in money, but in care. Power didn't come from titles, but from love. Driving back to his cold penthouse alone, Damian finally understood. His emptiness wasn't about work or money. It was the emptiness of a life devoid of genuine connection. He had spent his life building an empire, but his empire was soulless. She, with almost nothing, had built an entire world, a world filled with laughter, respect, and meaning. He realized he didn't just admire Lena's intellect. He loved her, her entire being, and the world she had created. And he knew to earn a place in that world, million-dollar contracts and expensive bouquets were utterly meaningless. He would have to learn a new language, the language of the heart. The applause and congratulations finally faded. Damian and Lena found a quiet moment on the building's balcony, looking down at the sparkling lights of Chicago. The chill of the night air was no match for the warmth of his hand holding hers tightly. "So, now I'm your partner and your fiancé." Lena smiled, her voice still trembling slightly with emotion. "Do I need to sign 2 different contracts?" Damian laughed, a warm, free laugh she had never heard before. "I think we can consolidate them. I believe in efficiency." He turned to her, his gaze gentle. "Are you really okay with all of this? The attention, the pressure." "Damian," she said, placing her other hand over his, "I face much scarier things just to survive. Being with the person I love isn't pressure. It's a privilege." They stood in silence for a long moment, the understanding between them more powerful than any words. Then Damian spoke, his voice slightly hesitant. I want to propose one more thing, Lena. Again? She teased. Are you going to offer me the head of HR position too? No. He smiled. This is just for you. He looked her straight in the eye. I want you to go back to school and finish your final year. Get your law degree. Lena was stunned. She hadn't expected this. But what for, Damian? I don't need a diploma to prove my abilities anymore. I know, he said quickly. I know that better than anyone. That diploma isn't for me, or for the firm, or for anyone else. It's for the 16-year-old girl who dreamed of becoming a lawyer to get justice for her father. It's for the woman who never stopped learning all these years, no matter how hard life got. You don't need it, Lena, but you deserve it. You deserve to complete your own story, for yourself. Damian's words touched the deepest part of Lena's heart. That dream, she had tucked it away in a quiet corner of her soul, thinking it would never have a chance to see the light of day. But the work... Miguel... She whispered the familiar obstacles. We're a team, Damian said firmly, squeezing her hand. You can reduce your hours. Your mother will help us with Miguel. I'll be here, supporting you every moment. I'm not here to solve your problems for you. I'm here to support you so you can conquer them yourself, as you always have. Lena looked at him, and for the first time in years, she allowed her old dream to come back to life. Tears fell again, but this time, they were tears of release and hope. I accept, she said. I'm going to graduate. Their new life began quickly and was filled with joy. The very next week, Lena was on the phone with the law school's office, arranging her re-enrollment. Carmen was overjoyed, declaring she would take over all of Miguel's care, so her daughter could properly become a real lawyer. Damian and Miguel grew closer, too. The boy no longer called him the confused uncle. One evening, as Damian was helping him with his homework, Miguel looked up and asked, Hey, Damian, can I call you Dad? The innocent question made Damian freeze, an unprecedented warmth spreading through his chest. He knelt beside the boy. I would be honored, Miguel. 6 months later, at the very community center where Damian had found his true self, a wedding, unlike any Chicago had ever seen, took place. There were no expensive event planners or gourmet caterers. The hall was decorated with flowers from Mrs. Rose's garden and with silk ribbons tied by Carmen and her neighbors. When Lena, in a simple white dress, walked down the aisle arm in arm with Miguel, Damian was waiting for her. He was no longer the CEO of an empire. He was just a man, looking at his family, at his true home. Professor Marchesi, the teacher who had given Lena her first law books, officiated the ceremony. Before exchanging vows, Lena turned to the guests. You used to know me as the janitor. Who knew the law? She said, her voice steady and full of emotion. But today, I'd like to be known as something else. I am Lena Morales, a final-year law student, a partner at Hayes & Lee, a mother, and soon, a wife. She turned to look at Damian, smiling. And I'm here to say that every dream, no matter how long it's deferred, can come true. When Damian slid the ring onto her finger, it wasn't just a vow of love. It was the affirmation of an extraordinary journey, a real-life fairy tale where intellect, kindness, and perseverance had conquered all. After Lena's emotional declaration, Professor Marchesi smiled warmly. He turned to Damian, who was looking at his fiancée with a gaze full of adoration. Now it's your turn, young man. Damian took both of Lena's hands, his voice no longer that of a CEO giving a speech, but of a man speaking from the depths of his heart. Lena, he began, I used to think that clauses and regulations were the strongest bonds in the world. I built my life on them. He gently squeezed her hands. But you taught me that love, trust, and kindness are the truly unbreakable agreements. You deciphered the most complex contracts, and you also deciphered my heart. He turned to look at Miguel, who was standing beside his mother with a serious expression. "And Miguel, I promise to always be your reliable assistant on trips to the park and your #1 partner in video game matches. This clause will be perpetually in effect." Miguel giggled. Damian turned back to Lena. "I can't promise you a life without challenges. But I promise to always listen, to always understand, and to always be the home you can return to. I love you." When they exchanged rings under the watchful eyes of their two worlds now merged into one, it was more than a ceremony. It was the confirmation of a truth that had long existed. Their kiss after the declaration, "You are now husband and wife," was not rushed or intense like before. It was peaceful, deep, and held the promise of a happy future. The room erupted in applause, and the neighborhood children tossed sunflower pebbles into the air, creating a golden rain for the happiest couple in Chicago. 1 year later, Lena Morales's Juris Doctor degree, awarded with honors, hung proudly on the living room wall. It wasn't in a fancy office, but right next to Miguel's crayon drawings and a wedding photo taken at the community center. Lena had not only graduated, she was now the head of a new department at Hayes & Lee, the Pro Bono and Community Outreach Division, an idea of her own that Damian had wholeheartedly supported. She still used her witty analogies, but now it was to help the most vulnerable. Members of society. Hayes & Lee was more successful than ever, but its reputation had changed. It was known not just as a shark firm, but as one with a heart. Damian had changed too. People still saw him in high-stakes boardrooms, but they also frequently saw him in jeans, cheering on the sidelines of the children's soccer team on which Miguel was the star. He attended parent-teacher conferences and patiently explained charts to small business owners at the community center. He smiled more, and the stress lines around his eyes had faded. That evening, after Miguel was fast asleep, Damian and Lena sat on their porch, looking out at the small garden they had planted together. "Do you ever regret it?" Lena asked softly, resting her head on his shoulder. "Giving up the image of the cold, invincible CEO?" Damian was silent for a moment. He looked up at the starry sky, then back at the woman who had completely changed his life. "The only thing I regret," he said, his voice low and full of love, "is not realizing my own door was installed with its hinges on the wrong side sooner." Lena smiled. She knew their journey wasn't a fairy tale about a Cinderella and a prince. It was the story of two people who found each other and, together, learned how to rebuild their own world, based on a single contract that needed no signature: the contract of love.